They were shouting at him to get off the stage, but no one expected what would happen when his tiny fingers touched the piano. The hall was already full when the small boy arrived. Soft golden lights hung from the high ceiling. Long red curtains covered the back wall of the stage. A large black grand piano stood in the center, shining under the spotlight. Rows of chairs stretched far into the room. Parents whispered. Teachers checked their phones. Teenagers in neat outfits waited nervously near the stage steps. It was a serious music event. Most of the performers were much older. They wore polished shoes, dark suits, long dresses. Their fingers moved in the air as if they were already playing invisible keys. Then the little boy walked in. He held a folded paper in one hand. His shirt was simple, slightly loose. His shoes were clean but old. He looked smaller than everyone else, much smaller. Some people did not even notice him at first. He stood near the side of the stage, staring at the piano. His eyes were wide, not scared, just quiet. One organizer looked down at the paper in his hand. "You are performing?" the organizer asked. The boy nodded. The organizer looked confused. "How old are you?" "7," the boy replied softly. The organizer paused. 7. Around them, a few older students turned their heads. One girl raised her eyebrows. A boy in a black suit gave a small laugh. 7. Someone whispered, "This isn't a school play." The boy heard it. He lowered his eyes, but did not move. The host stepped onto the stage. The microphone gave a short sound of feedback. The audience slowly quieted down. The first few performances went smoothly. Strong music, fast fingers, loud applause. Then the host looked at the next name on the list. There was a short pause. The host cleared his throat. "And now, our next performer." A few seconds of silence passed. The small boy stepped forward. At first, some people thought he was just helping, maybe moving something, maybe lost, but he kept walking. Toward the piano, murmurs began to spread across the hall. "Is this part of the show? He's too small. Where are his parents?" The spotlight followed him as he reached the piano bench. The bench looked almost as big as he was. He climbed onto it carefully. His feet barely touched the pedals. The whispering grew louder. A man in the second row shook his head. "This is not serious." Another voice came from the back. "This competition is for trained students." One of the judges leaned toward the others. Their faces showed doubt, confusion. The organizer from earlier walked closer to the stage stairs. His expression looked tense. The boy sat still on the bench. His small hands rested on his knees. He looked at the piano. The black surface reflected the bright lights above. The white and black keys looked endless. He swallowed. The host walked toward him quietly and bent down. "This event is mostly for older students," the host said in a low voice. "Are you sure you're ready?" The boy nodded. His hands were shaking now. Not because of the piano, because of the noise. A few people in the audience began clapping slowly, not in support, but in impatience. Someone said loudly, "Let the real performers play." The words felt heavy in the air. The boy's chest moved quickly. He looked toward the crowd. So many faces, so many eyes. For a second, it felt like the room was closing in. The bright lights felt hotter. The whispers felt sharper. The organizer stepped closer again. "Maybe we should reschedule him," he told the host quietly. The boy heard that too. He knew what that meant. It meant not today. It meant go home. It meant maybe never. He tightened his small fingers together. He remembered something. A quiet room. A simple keyboard near a window. Soft evening light falling on the keys. Long hours alone. No audience. No whispers. Just music. He looked back at the grand piano. His eyes changed. There was still fear there, but also something else. Determination. The host hesitated. The judges exchanged looks. The audience grew restless. "Please," the boy said softly. His voice was almost lost in the hall. Can I just play once? It was not loud, but somehow it reached the front rows. A woman in the audience leaned forward. The room slowly became quieter, not silent, but softer. The organizer stopped moving. The host looked at the judges. One judge gave a small nod, just one. The host straightened up. He stepped back from the piano. You may begin, he sighed gently. The spotlight grew brighter. The boy adjusted himself on the bench. His feet stretched toward the pedals again. They barely touched. He lifted his hands. Tay trembled. Not from weakness from pressure, from all the voices still echoing in his mind. He closed his eyes for a second. The hall felt endless. The air felt thick. Some people crossed their arms. Some leaned back, ready to be disappointed. A few teenagers backstage watched with quiet smiles, expecting a mistake. The boy took a slow breath. Inhale. Exhale. His fingers hovered above the keys. The entire room seemed to hold its breath with him. Time felt slower. Even the lights seemed still. He opened his eyes. He did not look at the crowd anymore. He looked only at the piano. The polished black surface. The clean white keys. The deep shadows under the lid. His small reflection stared back at him. His fingers lowered slightly. Not touching yet. Just close enough to feel the cool air above the keys. Somewhere in the back row, someone whispered again. But it sounded far away now. The boy did not move. Not yet. His heart beat fast. He could hear it in his ears. But underneath that, there was something else. A melody. Soft. Waiting. The same melody he had played alone many times. The same melody that had filled his quiet room at home. The same melody no one here had ever heard. His fingers lowered 1 inch closer. The hall was now completely silent. No whispers. No laughter. Just waiting. The first note was about to be born, and no one in that room knew what was coming next. His fingers finally touched the keys. The first note was soft, so soft that a few people in the back leaned forward to hear it better. It was not loud, not fast, just clear, pure. Another note followed. Then another. The sound moved slowly across the hall like a gentle wave. It did not rush. It did not try to impress. It simply existed. The boy's shoulders relaxed a little. His hands were still small on the wide keyboard, but they no longer trembled. The melody began to grow. Left hand steady. Right hand light. The notes felt like quiet steps on a long road. People who had crossed their arms slowly uncrossed them. A man in the second row stopped shaking his head. One of the teenagers backstage lowered his smile. The music was simple, but it carried feeling. It sounded like early morning light coming through a window, like someone sitting alone, thinking about a dream they were too afraid to share. The boy did not look at the audience. His eyes stayed on the keys, his back straight, his breathing slow. He pressed the pedals carefully with the tips of his shoes. The sound became deeper, richer. The melody changed. It was no longer shy. It began to rise. Stronger now. Clearer. The soft notes turned into flowing lines that moved up and down the keyboard with confidence. A quiet gasp came from somewhere in the hall. One of the judges leaned forward. Another stopped writing. The organizer near the stairs froze in place. The boy's fingers moved faster, not wild, controlled. Each note had space to breathe. Each pause had meaning. It felt like he was telling a story without words. A story of small rooms and long nights, of practicing when no one was watching, of believing in something even when others laughed. The audience felt it. They could not explain it, but they felt it. The melody climbed higher. Bright notes sparkled in the air under the golden lights. The red curtains behind him seemed deeper now, like a warm sunset. The black piano reflected his small hands moving with quiet power. Then suddenly the music shifted. Ite kame bold full. His left hand moved in strong patterns. His right hand danced across the upper keys. It was no longer the sound of a child trying. It was the sound of someone who understood the piano, who trusted it. The crowd was completely silent now. No whispers. No movement. Even the air felt still. The boy closed his eyes. He was no longer in the big hall. In his mind, he was back in that simple room. The small keyboard near the window. Evening light falling across the floor. No one telling him he was too young. No one asking him to leave. Just music. His fingers moved faster again, but still clean. Still clear. The melody rose to its highest point. Strong. Confident. Unafraid. It filled every corner of the hall. It wrapped around the seats. It touched the walls. It reached the very back row. A woman near the center lifted her hand to her face. She did not know why her eyes felt wet. The man who had spoken earlier about real performers now stared at the stage without blinking. The judges looked at one another. Their expressions had changed. Doubt was gone. In its place was something else. Respect. The music slowed. Not because it was weak, but because it was reaching its final breath. The notes softened again, like the end of a long day. Like sunlight fading behind quiet buildings. The boy opened his eyes. He pressed the last few keys gently. Each note landed softly. Carefully. Then came the final chord. It echoed through the hall. It lingered in the air. And then, silence. Not the restless silence from before. Not the impatient silence. This was different. This silence was full. Heavy. Emotional. The boy kept his hands on the keys for 1 second longer. Then he slowly lifted them. His feet slipped off the pedals. He did not look up right away. For a moment, he seemed small again on the big bench. The hall remained still. No one moved. No one spoke. Then, somewhere near the front, one pair of hands began to clap. Slowly, softly, another pair joined. Then another. The sound grew. Clapping filled the room. Louder. Stronger. People began to stand, row by row, until almost the entire hall was on their feet. The applause was no longer polite. It was real. It was full. The same people who had doubted him were now cheering. The organizer wiped his forehead quietly. One of the judges stood up too. The teenagers backstage stared in silence. The boy finally looked up. His eyes were wide again, but this time they were not filled with fear. They were filled with something warm. He stood from the bench carefully. The spotlight followed him as he gave a small bow. He did not smile big. He did not wave. He simply bowed with respect. The applause continued. It echoed off the high ceiling. It shook the red curtains. It wrapped around him like a shield. In that moment, he was not the smallest person in the room. He was the bravest. The noise slowly softened. People began to sit down again, but the feeling stayed. The judges whispered quietly to each other. The host stepped back onto the stage, still looking surprised. But before any results were announced, before any scores were shared, something more important had already happened. The boy had proven something that numbers could not measure. He had walked onto a stage where people told him to leave. He had faced voices that doubted him. And he had answered with music. No anger. No argument. Just courage. As he stepped down from the stage stairs, the same organizer who had questioned him earlier gently touched his shoulder. This time, there was no doubt in his eyes. Only respect. The boy walked past the older students. Some avoided eye contact. Others gave small nods. He returned to his seat quietly. He looked back at the stage once more. The piano stood under the lights, silent again. But it no longer felt distant. It felt like a friend. The event continued. Other performers played. Other songs filled the hall. But something had changed in the air. Everyone knew it. They had almost missed something beautiful. They had almost let fear decide who was allowed to try. When the evening finally ended and people walked out under the cool night sky, many were still talking about the small boy and his music. Not because he was 7, but because he had the courage to sit down and play when the world told him not to. And somewhere inside that big hall, under the quiet golden lights, the echo of his final notes still seemed to float, as if reminding everyone sometimes the smallest voice carries the strongest sound.